Awesome. Thank you. I should have said that sooner. So that's sort of a preview, not a preview, but a little background on Esther. And so I just want us to kind of hold that context up against this, the way we are seeing in our public life right now, this very text be weaponized against, the bodily autonomy of women, being very intentionally weaponized against trans and LGBTQ people in general. I think that this really highlighted for me why it's so important for us to really go deep on these scriptures and understand that, like, people who are claiming to own them may actually not be the sole arbiters of what these texts say. Folks have been dropping stuff in the chat. Uh, I wonder if anybody has anything they want to share about this piece. Questions, comments. You can be thinking about it and you can drop it in the chat, or you can raise your hand if it comes to you. But I also know Reverend Shaneequa, Jana says, I've just always appreciated that Esther is even included in our Bible. Yes, absolutely. And it really highlights what life was like in that time under Persian rule. Yeah, there's a lot there. And more parallels, I think, than make me personally comfortable to some things that are happening today. Reverend Shaneequa also, it just so happened, had a reflection on Esther 4 at the ready. And so, Shaneequa, if you're able, I wonder if you would be game for sharing that with us now.
Absolutely. And I'll just go, if that's okay. So perhaps you've been brought here for such a time as this. One of the interesting things about the book of Esther is that God is never mentioned in it. And yet God is still present and working throughout everything. And sometimes we can feel, or many times I have felt like God was silent or absent in my life. And I'm sure many of you have felt like this before. And it's during these times that we have to trust and know that God is still working. And it is during these times that we need to reach out and find community. And I'm telling you to find community because many times, actually most times, in fact, God is working through imperfect people like you and me. And if we find community, we find those people. And now Queen Esther had to shift her mindset or change her mindset to answer her call for such a time as this. And we have to shift and change our mindset too, maybe. You see, in the beginning, for Esther, life was something that she just sort of passively received. Life was done to her. Other people made decisions for her, and she was just kind of along for the ride. And then came her time to shine, and her time to take risks, her time to be brave, and her time to become an active participant in her life and in her community. And so she prayerfully took risks, she outed herself, and worked to save her people and transform her community. And I think we can all learn from Esther's example. We can move from being passive recipients of our experience in the world or passive butts in the pews to actively taking charge of our life and creating the world that we want to live in. Because now is our time to shine, our time to take risks, our time to be brave, and our time to make the world a better place for our queer siblings and for future generations. And don't worry if you aren't perfect. In Esther, there's a ton of violations of Jewish laws, like marrying Gentiles, eating impure foods, getting drunk, committing murder. And Esther and her uncle Mordecai participated in many of those things, and yet God still worked through them. And their example isn't one of doing what's right necessarily, but of faith and courage and trust. We are no different. We're imperfect people, and God will still work through us as well. So take courage and trust and reach out. And like Esther, there will come a time to take risks, to come out or to come in, to be your authentic self. What do I mean by come in? Well, growing up, my grandparents taught me about two-spirit people. We call them Winkte, or my kind of two-spirit person. We call Winkte in Lakota language. And they're important sacred and spiritual roles in society. And I didn't realize until later they were preparing me to live into that two-spirit role in my communities. As Indian people, we don't talk about coming out. We talk about coming in. Coming in is our recognition that we are sacred, that we are beloved, and that we have a role in our community, and coming in to our communities to fill that sacred role for a time such as this. We cannot allow fear to keep us from living into our call. One of the four main Lakota virtues is ohitika, or bravery. Bravery doesn't mean that you aren't afraid, but it means that you lead with love, that you take courage, and that you follow your calling and do what needs to be done in spite of that fear. That's bravery. And God comes to save her people, not just by bringing Jesus into the world, but through people like Esther, like Mordecai, and through people like us. Us, the common folks with our messy families and stressful lives and human imperfections, we are called for such a time as this. Us, who are made in the image and likeness of a loving God, we are called for such a time as this. Us, the strong and the weak, and the black and the brown and the white and the every shade in between, the rich and the poor, us, the gay and the straight and the bi and the pan and the cisgendered and the transgender, the non-binary, the large and the small and the fat and the skinny, all of us, with our fears, our limitations, and our brokenness, we are called for such a time as this. And we are called and commanded and maybe pushed even to come into our belovedness, come into our sacred role of creating a better world, and come into loving ourselves and our neighbors, all of them, for such a time as this. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend Shaneequa. I really appreciate you making time for us tonight, and especially for this connection to Esther. I wonder if folks want to share anything or anything that came up for you in this conversation about Esther. There's a lot of amens happening in the chat. Kirsten had a comment. I wonder about Mordecai and his public lament, especially given how lament, for example, in the Book of Lamentations, is often gendered female. That is very cool and interesting point. And I don't know the answer, but I love it. Jenna said that got me emotional. I like that. Other thoughts on this piece of Esther? We're also going to come back to it at the end. So, and Jana said, also thinking about coming out and how Esther had to come out or come in as a Jew, which was endangering herself by doing so. Yeah, that part of the story. And it's really clear that she's not like, yeah, put me in. I'm very excited to do this job. It's a lot of like, no, this is your responsibility. Like, to like all of us who are out here will have no access to the audiences that you have. Like, you need to do this for all of us. You're not going to be safer if you don't take this stand. That's really good. Any other thoughts about this piece of our time together? Jana says, none of us are free until all of us are free. Gail says, reminded again how laws are used to repress people. Exactly. Exactly. Well, I think folks can keep sharing as stuff comes up for you in the chat or just raise your hands. But I also want to make sure we have time to hear all the amazing stuff from our speakers. So Reverend Shaneequa broke us in a little bit with some preaching. And Shaneequa, I don't know. Do you want to do your part, your presentation part now? Or yeah. Okay. Then let's go to that and then we'll hear from Chris after you.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited. So I'm Shaneequa Brokenleg, and I'm the staff officer for racial reconciliation. And I'm an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, which is a Lakota tribe, but it also is part of the Oceti Sakowin, which are the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota people. And I'm what's called a Winkday in my language, which means third gender, or well, two-spirit. Doesn't translate to two-spirit. It actually means one who talks like a woman, because in Lakota, we don't have pronouns. There are no pronouns. So you either talk like a boy, or you talk like a girl, or in some cases, you'll talk with a mix of both. In certain situations, like if a whole community is reciting something, they will use both gendered sounds. What was I going to say? I think some of the things I was thinking about was, one, in Western culture, we often see difference as something that is other, or difference as something that is bad. And in Lakota culture, we see difference as something that is sacred. And so for us, lots of things are sacred, including our Winkday or two-spirit people. And growing up, my grandparents told me all these stories about Winkday people, and I thought they told all my cousins these stories, but they didn't. They only told me. But it was because they knew that I had this role, and it wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something that I would eventually have to live into when I came in, and that process of coming into the community to do that. One of the things that I really appreciate that my grandparents did was introduce me to other Winkdays in our community. One of them was like a medical provider, like a physician assistant or doctor. One of them was a curator of the museum, and one of them was a medicine person, or like a holy person. And so later when I came in, they were like, if you have questions that we can't answer, you can go to so-and-so, such and such and such and such. And they didn't tell me that they were Winkday when they first introduced me. They told me later. And so then I could always go to those people and talk to them. And one of the things I think is important is kind of how we see a whole community. Certain things are part of this complete breakfast. Winkday or two spirits in Lakota or Dakota communities are part of this complete community. And so for a community to be considered whole, you have to have men and women, or men or women, who heal with medicines. And you need to have men or women who heal with ceremony. You have to have, we call it Itanchampi, like political or social leaders. And Itanchan is also the word we use for Lord. And then Nachapi, which are battle, military, or like strategic leaders. And Heyokas, I don't know how to explain what that is very well. It's like a sacred backwards person. And then we also need to have those two-spirit people. We call them Winkday if they're male-bodied, and Blokami if they're female-bodied. But that's what makes a whole community, and you need to have those. And so it's a gift if you have one in your family. And as I then thought about colonialism, I thought about like the classic Christian question of that Paul tried to answer: must one become a Christian before one can become a Jew? And Paul answers that question and says, no, you don't have to become a Jew before you can become a Christian. I think I said it backwards the first time I said it. But somehow, as the church was spreading, after it got tied up in empire and power and greed, they forgot all about Paul. And they seemed to think that one must become a white person before they could become a Christian. And that sort of perpetuated this idea that all of our sacred stories or our creation story or our sacred ceremonies are bad. And they aren't. It's just they're not the same ones that the Jewish people had. And of course they wouldn't be, because it's our own culture, just like any other group of people. And I think now some people in Christianity seem to think that we must become straight before we can become Christian, or we must become cisgender before we can become Christian, right? They've just completely forgotten about Paul. But Paul absolutely says you do not have to do that. You can bring your authentic self into your Christianity, and it should look like what your culture looks like or who you are, right? The other things that I thought about were just like resource extraction and how the church has taken part in a lot of that, or opened up the ways for the land to be taken and then used or misused, and the harm to the environment. And we might not think of that as a gender issue, but it is, because women and children are disproportionately harmed by that. And in that resource extraction, they're not only harmed just by the environmental degradation, but when those people come, the jobs, those thousands of jobs that come when something happens, like I don't know why the balloons come, but when they have those man camps, like in North Dakota, for example, lots of young children and women are being sexually assaulted and taken and sex trafficked into those places. And so it does affect directly in that way. And then we also have the problem, which was the other point I wanted to make, was like the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. We have Indian women have the highest rate of sexual assault and the highest rate of being victims of domestic violence. And so often there's so many women that just disappear. It wasn't until very recently that the tribal police could even prosecute or pursue white people that came onto reservations. I shouldn't say white people, non-Indians who came onto reservations. If I were to go into your state and I were to do something illegal, I can be arrested and held in jail and prosecuted and go to trial in your state. Non-Indians who come onto reservations cannot be prosecuted by the tribal police, who are the police of that area, even though technically it's a sovereign nation. And that law just started to get switched by the Violence Against Women Act, and it's a problem in our communities, and it has been for a very long time. So that was the things that I thought of.
That's super, super helpful. Thank you so much, Shaneequa. I just feel like it's all very connected to this conversation about Esther and like what it means to be a people trying to survive and also live faithfully under empire and colonialism. So big round of applause. I wonder if folks want to ask Reverend Shaneequa questions or share stuff, thoughts you're having.
Oh, I have one more thing to say that I forgot. And that
please.
is, when people say like the thing about gay marriage in America, we've had same-sex marriage way before America was America. We've had it before white people were ever here. So don't let anybody say that to you. Sorry, that's the last thing I wanted to say.
That was the best possible last thing you could have said. Thank you. That's awesome. I see. Jenna says we need to get that part clipped and maybe share that out just across all of our platforms. A lot in the chat here. Reverend Liz said, "What an important and beautiful point. You don't have to be straight or cisgender to be welcomed into the church." We have Elizabeth just said, Queen Vashti also. Oh, this is another excerpt from Esther. Yeah, with more about the role of the eunuchs and the prescribed, basically, policy violence against women in these times. Very helpful context. Christy asks, is there a good resource you could recommend that explains how same-sex marriage was part of Native American cultures?
I'm trying to think of there's lots of books that have been written about it. There's one called Spirit in the Flesh. I think it's called Spirit in the Flesh. I'm trying to look at my bookshelf now. There's quite a few that have been written that are more newer than Spirit in the Flesh. Spirit in the Flesh was good, but it was written, I shouldn't say but, and it was written by a white person. So there are others now that have been written actually by Native Two-Spirit people themselves writing about these topics. But I'm not sure where I would tell you to point. There's a lot more was written about ceremonies and the things that the Two Spirits did as part of their sacred spiritual officials rather than who we were married to. Indians, we didn't really care too much about that kind of thing. Like for us, it wasn't so important. That wasn't like the most important thing. But there are many documented folks who were Two-Spirit people in many different tribes that were married to men, and some to men and women, and like male-bodied Two-Spirit, and there's female-bodied Two-Spirit married to women and men. One of the really common ones was part of Geronimo's band. They were a couple, a Two-Spirit couple, and one of them, I can't remember their names, Dotsy and something. I can look it up and put it in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you. Please do drop anything you can find in the chat. I think folks will be really excited about that. Lissa says, just had a friend be told by a pastor that she did wrong, and if she wasn't remorseful, no forgiveness. I'm so happy that the Episcopal Church is bringing all of this out of the shadows and into the light. We're so glad you are with us, Lissa. And I think, yeah, this is unfortunately common, and I don't think our own denomination is exempt from bad theology by any stretch of the imagination. But awesome to have you with us as we try and move this work forward. Oh, and Shaneequa just dropped in the chat. Do you want to read that for us, Shaneequa?
It just talks about that couple, the couple I talked
Okay.
about prior to Geronimo's band.
Awesome. Oh, I love this. Two Apache women that fought alongside the legendary Native American freedom fighter Geronimo. Lozin, a renowned medicine woman, never married, fought alongside the men, and was known as a shield to her people. She was captured and died of tuberculosis. Datetse, while being more feminine, still fought with Geronimo's band. She was a translator and a scout, and she, until the end of her life, mourned the loss of Lozin. Beautiful. Deb says, I haven't thought about Paul's words in that way before. I tend not to turn to Paul for liberating perspectives. You're not alone. You're not alone, Deb. You're not alone. No judgment here. Well, this is awesome. And I think we can come back to this in our Q&A at the end of our time together. Oh, yeah. Prayers asked for the family of Kenyon Baker, 16-year-old who was shot and killed Tuesday night and is being buried tomorrow in the traditional Gwich'in way. May they rest in peace, and may light perpetual shine upon them. Maybe this is a good time for us to bring Chris into the conversation. Poor Chris is very sick and has joined us anyway, and we are so grateful to him for crawling out of bed and being here with us. So if we could spotlight Chris, and there he is, and he doesn't look sick at all. So let's give him a round of applause for showing up.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Chris. This is Chris from the Transgender Law Center. You're getting a lot of special hands in the little Zoom screens. But so honored to have you with us, and we would love to hear from you on this topic of colonialism and gender injustice.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having me, and in my state as well. There's been so much travel, and different weather and climate changes have caused me to get a little sick. But I'm very happy to be able to join you all in this very important conversation about colonialism and gender injustice, and these two systems that are intrinsically tied together are also connected to my own personal lived experience. So I'd like to walk you all through not just what it means in the context and the terms of my work and the current state that we are living in, but in my life and in my 27 years of being here. I was born in a very rural community, in a community that was poor and working class. And as a Black trans man, that was assigned birth differently. And my mother, who had me no older than 16 years of age, the world that I was brought into had a lot of systemic oppressions working against me. My mom, she finished high school and worked two jobs sometimes to make ends meet for a while. And I saw up close the prison industrial system that targeted and imprisoned Black people at disproportionate rates became something I knew very well from a young age as it impacted a lot of my family members. I saw the effects and the impacts of Western colonialism because of this. I saw the exploitations and the racism that took years from my family. I saw firsthand the struggles and exploitations of my mother, in particular, being a Black woman facing not only racism, but exploitation, specifically misogynoir, her being discriminated against and facing even greater hardships because of her race and gender intersections. And because of this, hardship wasn't something that I didn't already understand. It was deeply rooted in my everyday society and those that I loved. And as a Black trans man, I faced a different battle due to colonialism and gender injustice. Because so much of colonialism is the removal and the destruction of one's culture, one's history. And due to the enslavement of Black people across the diaspora, a lot of our trans and queer histories and stories didn't get passed down. And due to a lot of white Christian nationalism and the indoctrination of those of Western colonialism in particular about gender and all its fluidity, it added to many other oppressions that I and many like me had to face. But I want to pause because there's something so powerful in this moment that's happening and in this movement as it's happened many times before, because Black and brown and indigenous people who are trans and queer are doing what we have always done. We're existing and we're thriving. And from our ancestors like Francis Thompson, who was the first transgender person to testify before Congress, like Marsha P. Johnson, alongside with Sylvia Rivera, who led the Stonewall riots, to a transcestor who's still here living with us today, Miss Major, who helped with the Stone Riot, who lived through that and has been such an instrumental part of our movement. We have centered love and joy in this moment, and it scares the far right. The solidarity from the outside of our communities scares them because our movement has not only been exposing the truth, but asking people to seek liberation. They have put so many anti-trans legislations out there, not just to attack the rights of trans people, but of bodily autonomy and the right to make decisions between a person and their doctor. But if you're watching the numbers right now of anti-trans legislation that's being introduced, which is roughly around 530 as of September this year, only 44 of those bills have been passed into law. This paints a completely different picture that they're telling us. This actually showcases that we are winning this battle. We are winning this battle because it's not just our battle that we are fighting. It's a collective fight and a struggle and a collective liberation that we are working towards. At TLC, I'm very humble, and we are humble of the job of leading national coalition work like the Trans Agenda for Liberation. This coalition that birthed our community-led guide. It's a living document that demands for immigrant justice, disability justice, racial, environmental, reproductive, economic, and gender justice, because it's all connected and all rooted in trans justice and trans liberation. And if you all have the time, and I'll make sure to put this in the chat, please go and read this agenda, see the work that trans and gender nonconforming folks have and are doing. Sign our demand sheet demanding the Biden administration implement the Trans Agenda for Liberation, which you can find. And like I said, I'll put that in the chat. But also, I want to urge folks to get involved locally, providing public comments when you can, or testimonies, calling your local legislators, going to local school board meetings, and amplifying BIPOC leadership. The tactics that the right is using to attack trans people are the same tactics that they're using when it comes to critical race theory It's the same tactics that they're using to try to oppress gender oppression as well. And so, if you're in the position of privilege, please use your voice. We can win this fight against the ongoing genocides, against white supremacy, against capitalism and fascism, but we have to do this in solidarity. And like I said, I really appreciate you all and thank you for your time and allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Chris. We are super, super grateful to have you with us. I know you may not be able to stay because you are under the weather, but we're super grateful. And I think if you're able, if anybody has a burning like question or comment they want to ask Chris while we got him, you should do it now. I want to flag this thing that came up in the chat in particular. Jana said things have been tough down here in Arkansas, but I have so much hope when I look at what other states have been able to fight against. And Reverend Shaneequa said we've had several bad pieces of legislation pass here in South Dakota too. So I wonder if there's ways that Transgender Law Center has connected to states where the fights are particularly stark right now, or if you know about ways that um, maybe people in those states can be part of something, because I think we have a lot of those folks on this call.
Yeah, at TLC, we really truly we don't like to go into communities and tell them what they need to do. A lot of times communities already have those solutions. They just need the resources. And so that's what we try to provide. We try to go and make sure that we're listening to what it is that they need. In particular, looking into the southern and Midwest regions, doing local grassroots organization work and uplifting them. Right now, we have a trans narrative lab that focuses on narrative research and development. And narrative, basically, in a nutshell, if you're wondering, like when I say narrative messaging, is just basically trying to change the minds and hearts of people. And so we work with different coalitions and different organizations that are local in different communities to be able to develop communications and rapid responses and messaging research so that they can be able to get these messages out here around race, class, and gender. And if you go on the Transgender Law Center website, you'll be able to see that. And I would also add that getting involved with your local grassroots LGBTQ organization is a really great way to be able to volunteer and show up for trans and gender nonconforming people and queer people in your community.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much, Chris. And it looks like Reverend Melanie dropped a link in the chat too to the Transgender Law Center's resources. Paula says, find your local P flag. Folks are very interested in connecting with or supporting maybe long distance folks doing this work in the Deep South and other states facing these policy battles. So, oh yeah, we've got folks signing off to go to a Poor People's Campaign event right now, but we are grateful that we had you. I wonder, before Chris has to jump, are there any other questions for Chris? You can hit your hand raise button, or drop it in the chat. And if not, we can also just open it up to more questions and reflections generally. And thank you again, Chris.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate you all.
I feel like we got a lot tonight, a lot of information, a lot of fronts, um, a lot of both like way back thinking about how you build these networks and these kind of social movements for justice up against these really brutal systems in the ancient world and in the Bible, and also and still today, which can feel like a lot, but this is really rich, and I just want to remind everybody that we've recorded it, so if you feel like you need to go back and pull stuff out, listen again, we will be sharing this on the Episcopal Church webpage. Chris is getting a lot of love in the chat. how about uh if folks don't, if you feel overwhelmed, you don't have a question right up front right now, I wonder if this would be a good time to maybe look back at Esther. What we try to do in this series is we read the Bible passage once and then we read it again at the second time after we've heard from some presenters just to see like what connections our brains have made in connecting, the past to the present and the present to the past. So maybe we could, Amanda, if you've got it, maybe we could put the that second slide up. Uh, and maybe we'll do a second reading this time. And let's get if we could get an English volunteer, and then we'll do a Spanish read through one more time. Your hand raise button if you want to be. I see Mac. Mac, you want to come read the English for us? Awesome, thank you.
The whole thing?
If you have it in you, go for
Oh,
it.
goodness. I don't have the Spanish in me. I do have the English in me, though.
Oh, yeah, just the English, and then we'll have somebody else read the Spanish.
Yeah, it was sitting on the Spanish for a hot second, and I was a little concerned.
No, well, you're good.
All right.
Just the English right now.
Esther 4:117. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went through the city, wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Judeans, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai, so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hatak, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai and learn what was happening and why. Hatak went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Judeans. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, so that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and charge her to go to the king to make supplication to him and to entreat him for her people. Hatak went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hatak and gave him a message for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone, may that person live. I myself have not been called to come into the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Judeans. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Judeans from another place. But you and your families and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Judeans to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, day or night. I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mac. And maybe actually I think we had that translated through live translation into Spanish. So maybe let's take let's just take a minute here. Oh, we have Elizabeth volunteering to read in Spanish. Perfect. Okay.
Cuando Mardoqueo supo lo que había pasado, se rasgó la ropa en señal de dolor, se vistió con ropas ásperas, se echó ceniza sobre la cabeza y empezó a recorrer la ciudad dando gritos llenos de amargura. Así llegó hasta la entrada del palacio real, pues no se permitía que entrara nadie vestido de tal manera. También en cada provincia donde llegaba la orden y el edicto del rey, hubo gran aflicción entre los de Judea, los cuales manifestaban su tristeza con ayunos, lágrimas y lamentos. Y muchos de ellos se acostaron sobre ceniza y se vistieron con ropas ásperas. Las criadas que estaban al servicio de la reina Esther y los eunucos que formaban su guardia personal comunicaron a ésta lo que estaba sucediendo. Entonces la reina se llenó de angustia y envió ropa a Mardoqueo para que se cambiara la ropa áspera que tenía puesta, pero él no quiso aceptarla. Esther llamó entonces a Hatat, que era eunuco y oficial de la Guardia Real, y le ordenó que fuera a ver a Mardoqueo y le preguntara qué estaba sucediendo y por qué hacía todo aquello. Hatat fue a hablar con Mardoqueo, que estaba en la plaza de la ciudad, frente a la puerta del palacio real. Y Mardoqueo lo puso al corriente de lo que pasaba y de la cantidad de plata que Amán había prometido entregar al tesoro real y cambió de los de Judea fueran exterminados. También le entregó una copia del decreto de exterminación publicado en Susa para que se le diera a Esther y así pudiera ella estar informada de todo. También le recomendaba a Esther que hablara personalmente con el rey y le suplicara que interviniera en favor de su pueblo. Hatar regresó y le contó a Esther lo que Mardoqueo le había dicho. Entonces Esther envió nuevamente a Hatat con la siguiente respuesta para Mardoqueo. Todos los que sirven al rey y los habitantes de las provincias bajo su gobierno saben que hay una ley que condena a muerte a todo hombre o mujer que entre en el palacio, en el patio interior del palacio para ver al rey sin que él lo haya llamado, a no ser que el rey tienda su cetro de oro hacia esa persona en señal de clemencia y le perdone así la vida. Por lo que a mí me toca, hace ya 30 días que no he sido llamada por el rey. Cuando Mardoqueo recibió la respuesta de Esther, le envió a su vez este mensaje. No creas que tú, por estar en el palacio real, vas a ser la única de Judea que salve la vida. Si ahora callas y no dices nada, la liberación de los de Judea vendrá de otra parte, pero tú y la familia de tu padre morirán. A lo mejor tú has llegado a ser reina precisamente para ayudarnos en esta situación. Entonces Esther envió esta respuesta a Mardoqueo. Ve y reúne a todos los de Judea de Susa, para que ayunen por mí, que no coman ni beban nada durante 3 días y 3 noches. Mis criadas y yo haremos también lo mismo, y después iré a ver al rey, aunque se vaya contra la ley, y si me matan, que me maten. Entonces Mardoqueo se fue y cumplió todas las indicaciones de Esther.
Gracias. Thank you so much. So let's put the slide back down so we can pull our ASL interpreters back up. Awesome. We dropped the text in English in the chat too, if you want to look at it there. And I'm wondering, on the heels of these presentations, is there something about this passage that lands differently for you? Something you didn't see before? Deb put in the chat, I know that I'm taking this out of context, but I'm very struck by the words. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than the other Judeans. As a white cis person, I might think that I am special, but ultimately I am still answerable or responsible for my own actions. Reverend Shaneequa.
That's what was making me think about ally versus accomplice or co-conspirator. It's like, I don't know that we need more allies. Those are the people who just kind of cheer you on from the sidelines and won't work against you, but they don't actually take any of their own risks or risk their own privileges to help. We need the people like Esther who are willing to take risks and actually, put skin in the game to accomplish the work of changing. And it's risky and scary, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Like, you're doing it right when suddenly it's a lot more dangerous, which is a hard sell. I see Kirsten.
I'm struck in this second read by the layers and the barriers that the king places between himself and the people that he rules over, right? How hard it is to get to, that being even approaching the king means you could die, right? Like he will choose if you will live or die just from being in the presence, what you can and cannot wear in the presence of the king. It's just striking to me this time around.
Totally. Thank you. We got a bunch of hands. Lissa, go ahead.
This time I was really struck by all the comments too about such a time as this. And it really resonated with, it's like a super parallel. And sometimes it's kind of despairing to think that, when this was written and now today we're where we are. But I was also struck by what Reverend Shaneequa just said about allies, because I'm part of Sacred Ground, trying to do white work so that we can stand with and behind and push. Because as one of our pastors said, if the people of color could do this by themselves, it would have already been done. But we need to do our work and join. So I really appreciate everybody who's spoken. Thanks.
That's awesome. Thank you, Lissa. I think Miranda is next.
Yeah, I think this time around, I was really struck by Esther's first response when she hears what Mordecai is doing is to offer him clothing so he doesn't have to wear a sackcloth. And even, in her response to what is going on, to initially say, like, well, there's all these laws and, like, even I can't just go and do this. And it's making me think about kind of the limitations that get put on marginalized people to express divine and righteous anger at the oppression and the harm that is being done to them. The idea that you can protest things if you want to, but it has to be done in a certain kind of way that usually means that people in power still get to be comfortable with it. And, that anything that strays from that then makes your protest illegitimate. And I think I'm feeling really grateful for the response that Mordecai has of pointing out, like, you can do everything right. You can be in the position of relative power that you have, and that's still, at the end of the day, like, that won't be enough. And I think it adds this time around a lot more weight to the idea that, like, we were made for a moment such as this. I think it makes it so much clearer to me this time around what Reverend Shaneequa was talking about, like, we don't have to be perfect to be in the right place at the right time and to take action.
I love that. And it's reminding me, actually, there are the piece that you said about Mordecai's clothes. And I feel like Esther kind of, more than many places in the Bible, has this attentiveness to, like, it's sort of like the secret labor of like thinking like, okay, how am I like as an oppressed person from an oppressed community, like how do I navigate this stuff? Like there's so much detail. So there's this stuff about, we didn't read it tonight, but in the earlier chapters of Esther, like the process for dressing women in Esther's position, and literally like down to like, here is the makeup that they put on, like here are the clothes that they have to wear, here's the food that they're getting, and like this piece about clothing is just like all this stuff that when you pull it out like that, at first glance you can be like, why are they talking about this in the Bible? Like, and it's like, because it's real people's lives, right? Like it's real people's lives. If you are navigating these situations, you're constantly thinking about like, am I doing this right? Or what will the violence be that is done to me if I am dressing this way, if I'm not dressing this way, things like that. I see Mac's hand up.
I have been racking my brain all night trying to remember where I heard this piece of Esther. I've never read Esther as a whole thing, but I have been racking my brain because a part of it was sticking in my head as something that I had heard before, and I finally figured it out after reading it myself. Bishop Carrie Schofield Broadbent of Maryland, who was just consecrated this time last year, that is her kind of saying, her slogan, such a time as this. And I'll drop in the chat the picture of the sticker that she has. But it's amazing to me to kind of hear not only coming from just like ordinary people like us, not that we're all not extraordinary, but not only coming from us that we feel this and we feel the call to this, but coming from the higher ups, the big wigs, the big people, that they also feel this call and kind of the same call as us to make sure that we are being in such a time as this.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mac. I love that. Yeah, I feel like it's actually a phrase. Yeah, there's a lot of love, by the way, for Bishop Carey in the chat. I feel like I've heard that phrase like thrown around more and more often, actually, which is telling about the times that we're in. I just wanted to read a few of these comments from the chat. We have, is that Elizabeth and then Jessica are sharing, I'm struck by the detail of the money in exchange for the destruction of the Judeans, and how Esther is empowered by justice, even though she can lose her life. That's from Elizabeth. And then Jessica says, Esther teaches us to be strong in the face of difficulties, always with prayer, always with God's help. Paula shared, something painful I find is how the concepts and language of forgiveness and reconciliation get abused to silence people protesting oppression. Boats need to rock pretty hard, and that's not always a happy thing. They still need rocking. And Reverend Shaneequa said, when moving forward, the boat will rock. Miranda shared, my diocese recently returned sacred Northern Arapaho items that were sold to a white deaconess, and some of the white people who went to the ceremony were initially confused by the frustration that the indigenous people who received the items had that ceremony even had to happen. Reconciliation isn't a one and done affair. We should drop a link to that. If somebody can find the link to that, it's been in the news. Definitely worth reading that story and that part of our church's legacy. Kirsten said the very next verse is about Esther putting on her royal robes to approach the king. Yeah, I think there's like I think the thing that actually rings more deeply for me on the second time is just how, thank you for dropping that in the chat, Shaneequa. You have Esther and you have these eunuchs working together. They're not supposed to be working together. They're not even supposed to be able to get anything done for all these things that people have described, right? Like the conditions that people are kept in, the bondage that people are kept in, like this whole society has been built around one, people being terrified for their lives, two, different groups of people being separated from each other, not able to push liberation together forward, and yet that's happening. And I feel like the presentations we had tonight, both from Reverend Shaneequa and from Chris, like just gave a lot of life to that, and a lot of context for our current moment. So I want to see maybe Shaneequa, if you have any last things you're thinking about on the heels of this second reading, or anything you want to share with us from the
It
conversation.
wasn't in the reading, but it's in the beginning. Like the whole reason why Esther became the queen was the fact that the king wanted to objectify his wife. Like his wife, I can't remember the name, Ashti or Vashti or something like that. She like refused to come out because he wanted to show her off in front of everybody, and that's why she was ousted and why he had to get a new wife. And then like they did like this beauty contest basically for all of the queens, and Esther happened to win. And he selected a bunch of them, and then they had like beauty treatments for like a year, and then he selected one of them. And like just the objectification of all of that and how that was there.
Yeah.
And I
No,
think there's lots of coincidences in the story just in general. But a coincidence is a miracle where God wishes to remain anonymous. I don't remember who said that, but it's a theologian or something said that.
no, I love that. And I think that's so like it seems like everything about this story is like the king is trying really hard to, like, he had this one wife who was disobedient and not following orders, and like he needed to keep her in line, and so he's intentionally looking for somebody who is not going to rock the boat, like, and here comes Esther, who's probably picked because they think that about her. Sorry, Kirsten just put in the chat, it's like The Bachelor with subversive co-conspirators who act for liberation. Yes, yes, it is. I love that. I'll pull that out and put it on a clip, subtitle of a clip. Better TV. It would be better TV. I see Elizabeth's hand, and if you want to hear Elizabeth's question translated, go down to the interpretation button and select English.
Gracias. Pues yo
We might, Elizabeth, it looks like your screen might have froze. Are other folks having trouble hearing Elizabeth? Okay, maybe, yeah, I'm so sorry we missed it. If we get you back in the next minute, we'd love to hear it. I'm also noticing we are at time. And so thank you, huge thank you again to our presenters, Shaneequa and Chris, also to our interpreters. Thank you all so much. Shaneequa, I didn't actually ask you this ahead of time, but I'm wondering if you would do our closing prayer.
Sure. Give me a second. I didn't write it, but I love this prayer, and I was thinking about it today, especially as we think about not being perfect. It's called the Ode to the Awkward. I don't know if you've heard it, but I love it, especially with like Thanksgiving and stuff coming up. Okay. For the one who limps, who is a poor dancer, who hesitates at the escalator, who smacks their elbow on door jams, praise. To you who never gets the jokes, who have failed at love, who feel odd in every group, to you who hate to introduce yourself, be honor and glory. You who have dropped the whole casserole of your life splat on the floor, who believe you have nothing to say, whose handshake is as limp as old celery, blessed are you. Losers and misfits and three-legged dogs, praised be you, who try anyway, for you have the courage to be what we fear, and free of shine or polish you gleam with the radiance of the one whose glory is not divided, making us brave to attempt that most holy and amazing feat, to be ourselves. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you all. And we will be back next week. If you like that prayer, it's in the chat. Click the link. Next week, same place, same time. We will be joined by Dr. Natalie Zilagi from the Yale Child Study Center, who's going to be talking to us about the medical and clinical necessity of gender-affirming care for trans and gender nonconforming young people, along with Lindsay Delks and Alan Yarborough of our very own Office of Governmental Relations, talking about what the Episcopal Church is doing on our policy advocacy front in the world of gender justice at the federal level. So thank you all. Go in peace. So grateful for you. Have a great week.
Amém.